to Something for the Turbo, the new weekly podcast brought to you by Unfound, the global platform for the travel-loving cyclist.
Adventure, pioneering, frontier cycling, all words that are hugely overused within the cycling media. But today I'm delighted to be joined by Shannon Bufton. Shannon is the founder of Serk Cycling, and he can legitimately lay claim to all of those things. Serk pride themselves on genuine frontier cycling. They run trips to the Himalayas, to Kyrgyzstan, North Korea, and many other fascinating destinations where you can seek genuine travel, amazing cycling, and a fantastic experience off the bike as well. He's also got a very well regarded titanium business selling 3 different frames that are going from strength to strength. And we have a brilliant chat around, well, all of these things, China, and a whole lot more. So without further ado, let me bring you Shannon Bufton. Shannon, great to catch up. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Sitting here already in sweltering Beijing in the office. We should be outside riding my bike, but good, thanks.
Sorry, I've kept you from getting out. You're in the city. Are you not up in the mountains at the moment?
No, right here in the city centre. Mountains are in the distance, far away, unfortunately.
No, we got loads to cover today, so it'd be good to crack on. But I wanted to kick things off by asking you directly, what do you think you're most infamous or famous for? Is it being the pioneer of the Everest movement, or famously dressing as a panda at the 2014 Tour of Beijing?
Oh, that's a good question. I think probably there's the most photos of me in the panda suit.
Yeah.
I've got a fair few of those with a few riders and podium girls and bottles of champagne. So that one's been all over the internet. No one knows. I do. You do now. Well, the whole podcast knows.
The whole podcast, yeah. So, I mean, you were in the Middle East before you got to Beijing, weren't you? When did you actually land in Beijing?
2009, just after the Olympics. Prior to that, I was in the Middle East for a couple of years, and before that in Shanghai also for a couple of years, but Beijing since 2009.
Okay. And how did the whole Tour of Beijing come about, the panda dressing?
It was, the UCI announced that they wanted to have a Pro Tour race in China, and I immediately got on to the race director, Alain Rump, who was pretty prominent on Twitter back then, and contacted him and said, hey, I'm here in Beijing. There's lots of cool cycling stuff happening. How about we catch up and we talk a bit about what's going on with the race and how we could involve the local community. And from there, I got a job working with the media side of the race, and did that for a couple of years. And then the panda kind of came up famously from Dan Martin when he was at Liège-Bastogne, and Panda jumped out and spurred him on to take the win.
Oh, great, of course. Yes.
And that was at the same time where we were thinking about how to make the Tour of Beijing a little bit more humane and interesting for fans. So we saw that picture of the panda and went, hey, that panda is Chinese. It should be at the Tour of Beijing. There was an official mascot of the race, but it looked like a sperm, actually. It wasn't the best of mascots. So we sort of crashed the party with the panda. No one knew who it was. We just had a lot of fun with the riders, and we had a special event called the Panda of the Mountain, where the first rider across this line sprayed across the road, the whole team won a night of beer at our bar after the tour. So wow. It was the last race of the season. So the riders actually went pretty crazy. The Panda was just a whole heap of fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun. As I mentioned in the introduction, it's hard to know how to describe you other than, I suppose, a pioneer for cycling in China, or certainly letting the rest of the world know about it. But you've had a bike shop, you do sort of adventure tours, you've now got a growing and very well regarded titanium frame business. Where should we start from the beginning? Like how did you start the cycling scene in China? How did that all come about?
Yeah, well, it started with my previous career. I'm an architect by training, and I was working in China and the Middle East as an urban planner. And when the financial crisis hit in year 2009, my wife and I decided we'd had enough of the corporate world and wanted to do something that was more lifestyle oriented. Yeah. So we went back Beijing, and on the way we spent a couple of months traveling around Europe and saw the revival of the bicycle in the cities as an urban transportation vehicle.
Okay.
And having known Beijing, we knew that Beijing was once a city of bicycles, and that there was a whole lot of interesting cycling culture here. So my wife is from Beijing, and also been a lifetime cyclist. So we came back to Beijing and we started doing urban research about the old Chinese bicycle culture. And we started up the first bicycle NGO in China called Smarter Than Car. And we did talks at universities, online. I went to the World Congress of Architects in Tokyo, and Lehman went to Velo City, the World Congress on Bicycles and Cities in Vienna. And we talked about the uniqueness of Beijing's bike culture and how the rest of the world could learn from how a city once completely moved pretty much by bike. So, back then there were things like bicycle ambulances. You could get your teeth changed from the back of a bicycle. If you bought a new fridge or oven for home, you bought it home on a tricycle or a bicycle. The whole city moved by bike. And it was super interesting, all the kinds of bicycle lifestyles that there were here during the late 80s and early 90s. So
that's fascinating, and no more. I mean, so relevant given what the world's going through at the moment. The movement to using the bike to move around a city, and obviously that perking your interest coming from a sort of planning background. I mean, hopefully we're going to see more and more cycling all around the world at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's already lots of news reports out on the uptick in cycling, and for mobility, you just can't beat it. For mental health, you can't beat it. For in terms of footprint, from an environmental point of view, it's also fantastic. It just makes a lot of sense, and sometimes you need a disruptor like this COVID-19 to force people to get out there and start using it, and then it's easy for people then to see the benefits of riding a bike. So I think we will see a legacy move towards the bicycle across cities thanks to this crisis.
So how did you go from the NGO into sort of setting Serk Cycling up? And was that originally the shop, or was that the touring, or how did it sort of?
Well, it started because we needed to earn an income. We applied for all this funding to run the NGO. It was difficult for us to get money to research bicycles in China. No one seemed interested in supporting that type of work. So we also noticed at the same time that the kind of burgeoning middle class in China was starting to become interested in high quality, high-end recreational carbon fiber bikes. And so we just started selling the frames from Swift Carbon when that brand started out many years ago as a kind of side gig to earn money to fund our sort of research projects. So we started building and selling bikes out of our apartment and realized that that wasn't a bad way to earn an income. Then from there we set up the first bike bar, cafe and bike shop in Asia that was sort of supposed to be a hub for urban cycling and recreational cycling. It was a really nice architect design space, and from there we started off our first official kind of bike shop, and then since then we've continued to sell bikes and focus on the recreational side of things.
And that's amazing. So what year are we talking about when you set this up?
We set up that cafe in 2011.
Wow. So that really is sort of before the curve, really, sort of pioneering it. And I've been very fortunate to come to Beijing and cycle with you. You very kindly taken me out and some friends out on a bit of a trip. It's an amazing place. I think it's so easy. And speaking to your wife, actually, I didn't quite realize how recent the dramatic growth in Beijing was. It wasn't until the sort of late 90s that the city really grew so dramatically. But tell everyone a little bit about what kind of cycling is on offer in the city and just outside the city itself.
In the city itself, the urban sprawl is pretty large. I mean, for an Asian city, it's a big city. It's a city of 20 million people. But in terms of its urban sprawl compared to many Western cities, the footprint is not so huge. So within 30 kilometres of the city centre, you get to the outskirts where you're into the countryside. And on three sides of Beijing, there are mountains that go on for a long way, in the north all the way to Inner Mongolia. So there is absolutely amazing cycling terrain on the outskirts of the city. And I usually say to people, I've been riding here for over 10 years and I still haven't ridden every road out there in the mountains. I still have a list on my Ride with GPS of roads to explore when I have the time. The roads are just absolutely endless. And
they're immaculate as well. That's the thing that I'm not saying that I don't trust you. Obviously, we've been in contact before that, and I kind of knew that it was going to be amazing, but it's not until you see it that you quite appreciate just how amazing it is, if that makes any sense. Just the vastness and the beauty of the mountains, and quite different. The mountains to the north are quite different to the mountains to the southwest in terms of topography and feel. It's got so much to offer, hasn't it?
It has. I remember during the Tour of Beijing that I was working with Dan Martin when he was there with Team Garmin Sharp, and they were saying that they've ridden and trained all around the world and that they were just blown away by the quality of the cycling in Beijing. And if it was closer to their base in Europe, they would definitely come here for a training camp.
Really?
And these are riders who've ridden all over the world on the world's best roads. So coming from them demonstrates, I guess, how good the terrain here is.
Yeah, to be fair, it doesn't surprise me at all, because not only is the terrain spectacular, the roads are absolutely immaculate. They're like cycling on perfect brand new roads, and also super quiet. I mean, I don't think we ever really saw a car for a lot of the rides that we did. Maybe the odd, motorbike with chickens on the back, but not many cars or buses or anything like that. So it's really serene and very quiet, and so bizarre to think you're just a short hop from one of the busiest urban dense cities in the world. It's amazing.
Yep, I think it's also, that contrast between what you expect Beijing to be in terms of a crazy busy city, and then the complete serenity you get out in the mountains only 40, 50 kilometers away. It's that contrast which also helps make it feel, I think, so much more exciting here. But it is great.
And you were telling me, because I think, again, another sort of global perception of Beijing, probably from the Olympics, is sort of horrific air quality. They've made incredible strides very quickly in the last few years around that, haven't they? The air's really improved.
Absolutely. All of the factories that were creating pollution have all been moved outside of Beijing province. There's a lot of move towards electrified vehicles. Buses, private cars. The quality of the machinery that's used for the heating is also improving, them moving from coal to gas. So to give you an example, so far this year, we haven't turned on our air purifier once, whereas, 5 years ago, there would be the 1 day or 2 days a year you wouldn't have it on. So the air quality has improved significantly.
Incredible change. And one of the things I didn't realize until I last flew in, I remember flying into the airport and just seeing like huge amounts of sort of ground, sort of plastic. And I'm thinking, wow, is that some sort of farming or strawberries or something like that? And you were saying that I didn't quite appreciate how dry Beijing is, but I know you got cold in the very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer, but constantly dry. So a lot of the construction kicked up a lot of dust, which was really adding to the air quality problem, and they've really sort of addressed that as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, that plastic that you see from the air is to cover the dusty ground, to make sure that the soil stays undercover and doesn't get whipped up into the wind and into the air. So yeah, they do. Beijing is pretty renowned for doing all sorts of crazy stuff to control whatever weather, air quality. When they want to do it, they do it pretty seriously.
Yeah, that's it. When they want to do something, they do it very quickly. Cool. So obviously, I know that the travel, a lot of your tours have been cancelled this year, but it's so fascinating, some of the places. Obviously, China's a massive country, and you've explored a lot of it. I know that we want to get on to other topics, but I'd love you just to tell everyone a little bit about some of the areas you run trips or have run trips and hope to do trips again in the future, and what's on offer, because the diversity across China is just staggering. So give us your sort of top few tips, top few destinations, and why they are so outstanding.
Sure. Well, our concept is pretty simple. It's frontier cycling. So we're kind of always seeking out those locations that you might not have heard of, or no one's laid a Strava track yet. So it was Lehman, my wife, who was pushing me many years ago to go and explore China, and I was like, yeah, I'm not sure there's going to be that much out there. And then we went out and explored, and I was completely blown away by the variety of the terrain and the just sheer amazingness of the nature. So we, I think, most well known and the biggest wow factor trip is our trip that goes to Everest Base Camp.
Yeah.
Now, a couple of years ago, they paved the road into Everest Base Camp, so now you can ride your road bike all the way through Tibet, all the way to the base Everest Base Camp on smooth, lush tarmac, which is just amazing. And the kind of spiritual journey that you go on to the base of, the mother of all mountains on your bike is breathtaking. And the moment that you come around the corner where you first glimpse that side of Everest, it's really emotional time and just an amazing moment to have on the bike.
Quite awe-inspiring, and again, something quite hard to articulate in a podcast. Would you be able to share because I know you did that wonderful video the first time you tried the Everesting with cycling tips, and obviously they captured that sort of moment the first time you saw Everest on there really well. Would you be able to share the link for that so we can post it in the show notes? I highly recommend anyone to have a watch of that, and any other sort of links you've got with regards to that particular trip, because it just looks magnificent.
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. So Tibet and Everest, I think, are at the top of the list, and many riders that we've taken to Everest Base Camp put that on the top of their global list in terms of places to ride through. Then
sorry, Shannon, just to interject very quickly there. What's the timing window for a trip to Everest? Because I'm sure it's not an all year round cycling destination.
Yeah, usually it's early May through to mid October.
Oh wow!
It's the season you can go. I mean, you can expect a little bit of snow in May, and also you can get snow in September. But usually the snowstorms are only at high elevation and reasonably short, so you can still ride through.
Wow, I didn't realise that's actually quite a big window, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So, the other locations that we've ridden in China, we've ridden in Sichuan, which is a province next to Tibet, and it's part of the old territory of Tibet. That's also spectacular, pretty high elevation, over 3,000 meters, amazing rivers, green mountains, grasslands, and Tibetan culture. But there you have a little bit more accessibility. It's less restricted than the Tibetan Autonomous Region, and the hotels are a bit better. It's a little bit easier to get around. We've also ridden in Xinjiang, which is the westernmost province of China.
Okay.
And we've ridden right up to the Kazakh border. There is, again, spectacular. It's drier there. You have landscape that ranges from moonscape through to lush forests that look a lot like the European Alps when you get up higher into the mountains. And again, it's a whole other culture there. You've got the Uyghur culture. You feel more like you're in the Middle East there than you do feel like you're in China. But on top of that, you also have the good quality Chinese roads and hotels and infrastructure. So
Amazing.
Xinjiang is a great place to explore by bike.
Yeah.
And then this year we were supposed to do the first road cycling tour in North Korea.
Oh wow!
Unfortunately, that's off until the next year.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Oh, sorry.
Was that you or me?
That was me.
Oh wow! Big Brother's listening.
Big Brother's listening when you mention North Korea. Siri perks up. So yeah, North Korea is been on our radar for a while, and our good friends at Koro Tours that are also based here in Beijing, they negotiated access for road cyclists to get in there.
Amazing. Have they done any recce, or have you done any recce trips out there? I'd be fascinated to know what it's like in North Korea.
Yeah, I actually haven't done the recce trips myself, but one of the members of our partner organisation is a cyclist, and he's been out there and ridden the route and documented it. So yeah, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to go out there.
Wow, but yeah, that sounds. And will you look to, depending on the world situation, look at that North Korea trip again next year?
Yeah, that's the plan. So that trip also included riding on some roads that have never been ridden on before. The original plan was to do it in conjunction with an anniversary for North Korea, and so we were going to be granted special access to some areas of Mount Pektu, which is the sacred mountain, supposedly the birthplace of the North Korean people. So we were going to do a little bit of gravel / broken up tarmac riding there high into the mountains, which would have been pretty interesting. So
The,
yeah,
the,
look out for that trip next year. I think we're still negotiating on when we will do it next year, but they're pretty keen to make it happen.
yeah, that really is frontier cycling. The lengths people will go to get a Strava KOM, hey?
Yes.
And what just generally, you mentioned the sort of up the high mountains, it's sort of gravel and broken up tarmac. What are the reports around infrastructure elsewhere in North Korea? Are the roads pretty good? Accommodation, how would it all work?
Accommodation will be pretty basic. The roads are okay. We're suggesting that people bring a bike with at least 30C tyres. So, the road condition is pretty similar to what you would have seen in China maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So concrete roads that are pretty rough but rideable. And there's bits and pieces of new infrastructure there as well, which would be nice to ride on, but mostly pretty rough. That's part
Yeah,
of
and
it.
again, please do share all the links so we can so people can find information around these trips, won't you? And now I don't know if we're allowed to mention it, but I mentioned offline. You mentioned offline there are rumors of potentially a new event next year that you're looking into.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're actually thinking about doing it later this year.
Oh, brilliant!
Again, it's in response to the COVID-19 situation. We're planning to do an ultra endurance bikepacking race in the Himalayas, in the area that we do our trips. Again, the Himalayas has such mystique. It's such an amazing playground for adventure. So we thought it would be, and it's also extreme. We thought it would be a great place to run a hardcore self-supported race.
Yeah,
Uh,
amazing.
and this year, because it looks like we'll probably be stuck within China for the whole or most of the year. So there's a lot of riders who had planned to go to Europe or other parts of Asia for trips and are now stuck here in China. So it gives us all a chance to focus on an event and go out
Get
and
training.
get training and do some adventure in the backyard. So
Sounds like the final details are still being finalized, but give me some rough stats. I mean, just being in the Himalayas generally, altitude is high. What is it from point where to point where? What's the general idea of the event?
the general idea is we're looking at around about 1,800 kilometers. We're going to start a little bit down at a lower altitude in Yunnan province, and then ride up along the border between Yunnan and Tibet into Sichuan, and then through the really high mountains in Sichuan, so up above 5,000 meters for a little bit. And then a couple of years ago, some mates and I did a 10-day bikepacking adventure in really remote off-road communities in Sichuan. So the plan is to take the race route through that area, which is going to be very challenging. It's there's not many supply points. The road is there's bits of it you'll have to hike. There's high altitude again, up to 5,000 meters. Some crazy river crossings and some really big climbs. So that's the bit that excites me the most.
Yeah, that sounds like an ultra endurance. What an amazing event! And wow, it's a lot to think about in terms of how you prepare and how you survive an event like that. Incredible.
Yeah. So we'll probably end up being maybe, I think we're around about 1/3 off road, 2/3 on road, and 2/3 of it would be in reasonable going through regular towns, and 1/3 would be extremely remote. So it'll be a challenging one to kit up for.
And you're thinking September for this? Did I get that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And I mean, I wonder if there'll be any international travel by then. But if anyone is interested and is happy to take the risk, I suppose they can get in contact with you about finding out how they can get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. We should have a website up within the next couple of weeks. Great. So you should be seeing an announcement on that soon.
Brilliant. And is the plan for that to be like an annual event now?
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think that the Himalaya region deserves an ultra endurance race.
Agreed.
But, as you know, there are many events around the world now, and they're growing in popularity. So whether or not there'll be enough momentum to make it happen every year, we'll see. But we'd certainly like to see it grow in the following years after this year.
Yeah, the ultimate human test. But I do, we were chatting again offline. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I think that, in fact, I was speaking to Ryan Sears in the US last week, and we had a similar conversation offline that potentially endurance races, bike packing, I think there's going to be an increased appetite in these kind of events post COVID-19 for a whole host of reasons. But it'll be interesting to see if that evolution continues from sort of along those lines, really.
Yep. I think, just until this virus is under control with a vaccine, I think we'll all be avoiding big group gatherings, and these types of events allow you to be naturally socially distanced, and they're a little bit easier to organise under the radar as well, without having to close off roads and set up barriers and all sorts of things like that are very difficult to do in times of uncertainty.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. But there's also, I think, a bit of a movement to sort of back to nature, back to basics, exploration, solitude, all these things sort of tie in with these kind of events. And I think there is certainly a lot of people thinking or being more drawn to these types of events, and will continue to be so in the coming years.
Absolutely.
Good. Now, next, I'm going on about this all day. Have I missed any destinations off that people should be aware of? Or I'm desperately keen to talk to you about your frames and how that business is evolving and growing.
Sure. I guess we could lead in a little bit with a bit about our gravel adventures, which we've been doing for the last couple of years in Kyrgyzstan, which, if you haven't heard about the amazing off-road riding in Kyrgyzstan, then get on the internet now and start searching. It's heaven for gravel adventure riding, bikepacking. It's a great destination.
Kyrgyzstan. Okay, so help me. Where exactly is Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, it's in Central Asia. It borders Kazakhstan and China and Tajikistan.
Okay.
So it's a pretty poor Central Asian country. It's got, I think, 80% of the country is mountainous. It's got lots of water resources. It's a nomadic community. So Bishkek is the capital, which is reasonably built up. But once you get outside the borders of Bishkek, it's pretty quiet, and not that much infrastructure that's paved. Lots of dirt roads, lots of nomadic communities, horses, wild animals.
Wild animals? Anything to worry about?
Yeah, not really. Nothing that we've come across yet. But there's supposedly wolves out there, and the locals will tell you that every now and then someone's child gets eaten by a wolf, but I'm not sure whether that's true or an old wives' tale. So
how did you come across Kyrgyzstan, the gravel roads there, and how would what does a trip look like for someone that's interested in doing one?
Again, that was from our exploring in China. We went to the edge of Xinjiang, and when you're there at the edge, you see this huge mountain range rising in the distance, and you look on the map, and all the roads kind of stop at the Chinese border and sort of disappear into Kyrgyzstan. And we thought, wow, I wonder what it's like on the other side of that mountain range, what the riding there is like. So a couple of years ago, I reached out to Cycling Tips and said to them, let's go and ride in this area before it starts getting developed, and let's do a bikepacking adventure there. And they jumped on it, and we did another adventure with them there, which you can check out on their website, called The Silk Road: The Price of Progress.
Oh, we'll put that in the show notes as well. It's some unbelievable photography in that article, isn't there?
There is, yeah. I mean, the scenery there is just amazing. So you can't take a bad photo in that location. But the photographer is also amazing. I mean, we had Tim was our photographer, who's the main Cycling Tips photographer, who does just a fantastic job. He's a genius.
And the tours that you do there, are they kind of bespoke to what the client wants, or do you sort of run tours that people can join? And how long are they? What do they look like?
We run a 7-day tour there that we do 2 each year, and that involves some camping, some staying in hotels. They're fully catered. It's a little bit like a glamping bike trip. So the riding is pretty tough. It's off-road, but by the time you get to campsite, your camp is set up, the cook is cooking dinner, and you can relax with a couple of beers and then pass out into your tent, wake up in the morning and ride again. So we make the whole experience of traveling in those really remote regions reasonably comfortable. It's still very adventurous, but crew there to make sure it's all the horrible stuff is taken care of, the cooking and setting up tents and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And I can say, although my trip was less adventurous than Beijing, I have to say that just how Cirque looked after us during that trip was second to none. It was a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, great hospitality, and just makes the whole rounded experience fantastic.
That's good to hear. Thanks for those positive points. So yeah, getting on to the titanium bikes.
Yeah,
It's going to link the gravel riding back to our titanium bikes.
yeah,
Because we started doing gravel riding in remote parts of China in 2015.
yeah.
And back then it was the early days of gravel bikes, and there was nothing available in China. So we decided to build our own. There's a fabulous titanium factory in Beijing that's been building bikes for 30 years, probably one of the factories in the world that's built the highest number of high-end titanium frames.
Yeah.
And we went to them and started talking about a gravel bike, and that's how our foray into designing bikes for our frontier cycling trips came about.
Oh, interesting. So, because it's been a process of evolution, there's some quite interesting stories around the factory. Maybe you telling me, but where are you at now? Are you the development's finished? Your bikes are there to be bought online, global distribution. Talk us through what makes them good. Tell us the whole story.
Yeah, well, as I said, we started out with a simple need of needing bikes for ourselves, and then
Oh, for your trips, yeah.
for our trips, and then we also realised that the kinds of places that we were going were pretty extreme, and it would be nice to design bikes specifically for each of our trips.
Yeah.
So we now have three models. Our pure road bike, which is a reasonably fast geometry. It's optimized around weight, so that bike is perfectly built for riding the smooth roads of Beijing. And then we have a middle range bike, which is an all-road bike called the Captain, which takes up to 34C tires, so you can ride it off-road and on-road. And that's the perfect bike to take on our trips to Everest and to the kind of frontiers where you're doing a little bit of mixed surface every now and then.
Okay.
And then,
or to ride on bumpy Surrey lanes in southwest London.
yeah, frontier location.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
No, you can ride it there as well. It's actually, there's a trend now towards, riding road bikes that are a lot more capable, that can take bigger tires, and having one bike that does it all. And this bike was designed with that in mind.
With that in mind. Yeah, no, I only jest. It's just we have some tremendous potholes around here. That's why I mention it.
And then the other bike in our range is the full-on adventure bike, which we're now up to our second iteration on that. We've ridden the previous one a couple of years in Kyrgyzstan, and we've now modified it, and we're actually working on the final graphics of that right at the moment. But the frame design is done, it's being tested, so that'll be coming out within the next couple of months, and we're super excited about that one.
Okay, and what makes that a little bit different in terms of geometry and tyre clearance? What tyres would you have on there?
It'll be a 650B bike, so it's more designed for off-road use.
Yeah,
we're going to run it with 650B by 47 tyres. It's got lots of mount points for attaching bags and gear and so on. And we've tweaked the geometry a little bit to make it more comfortable, sits up a little bit higher, more specifically designed for the rigours of off-road adventure riding.
So you're truly using your architectural background with these. And obviously for longer distance and endurance and gravel and all the disciplines that these frames are catered for, titanium is a fantastic material for that in terms of just rider comfort, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's great in many ways. I think the most obvious one is in comfort. Just the way that it absorbs road buzz leaves you feeling less fatigued after the same amount of time on a bike compared to, say, carbon or aluminium. It's also, as a material, it's pretty bulletproof. So we just had a rider come in today who dropped his really nice bike against a pole. If it had been a carbon frame, there's a high likelihood that it would have cracked. The titanium frame just got scratched, and he brought it in, and we got some Scotch-Brite out and polished out the the scratch. So now the frame just looks like new.
Very good.
And the other great thing about titanium are that they're bikes for life. The longevity of the material in the frame is amazing. So they're not going to crack. They're not going to corrode. It's a bike that you'll be able to use for a very long time. And we think that's a much wiser way to deal as a brand with the environment by having a longer lasting, higher quality bike instead of something that you throw out after 5 or 10 years of use.
Yeah.
So
it was interesting. I actually when I had the engineer Alex Thomas, who you've met, do you remember Alex came with us to Beijing on? He raised that point around just there's still a lot of unanswered questions around how you recycle carbon, and that's going to become an increasingly interesting point, I think.
Yeah, and it's also the unknowns of carbon. I mean, if it's if something's been ridden for 20 or 30 years, you don't really know if there are any hairline cracks there. Are you going to give it to your young nephew or niece to ride as a training bike, when you've been sweating on it on the trainer for the last 5 years? There's just so many unknowns around the material that I think we're going to have a lot of carbon frames sitting around in 20 years' time that no one really knows what to do with.
No, that exactly. And where are you selling the bikes? I mean, is it domestic market? Do you sell overseas? How does that work? Do you have distributors? Can people buy online from your site? Talk me through your market at the moment.
Yeah, well, the next phase of the brand for us this year is to expand our distribution model. So at the moment, you can buy directly from us from our website. We have a dealer in Singapore, Service Course Cycles. While I was in Australia in the previous months, I've been working with some dealers and potentially a distributor there. And the rest of our bikes are pretty much sold within domestic market in China.
Okay.
So,
and talk me through that domestic market. You mentioned that. I mean, you've really seen it from its infancy, really. Where is the domestic Chinese cycling market, both from a leisure, recreation, and a competitive standpoint at the moment?
It's growing very, very fast. I mean, I usually use the number of bikes that I can count on the mountains on the weekend as my yardstick of how cycling is growing here. And I remember 10 years ago when we were riding in the mountains, it was just us foreigners and the occasional hardcore kind of touring cyclist. We would have the roads to ourselves. Now, when you go out to the major climbs around Beijing on a Saturday, on a climb within 50 kilometers of the city, you'll be riding up, and over the course of half an hour, you probably count another 50 to 80 cyclists going up or down.
Wow.
So it's really taking off. In terms of the market, there's a lot of people buying bikes, but there's a lot of bike brands who are coming here. There are a lot of Chinese bike brands that are coming online that are doing really good product. So it's a difficult market to operate in because the competition is so high.
Yeah. And would you say, I mean, do Western brands still hold quite a sort of status tag in China? Is there still big demand for Western brands in China domestically, or are there other domestic brands sort of really gathering momentum? And if so, which are the ones to look out for?
It's still all about the Western brands. So the Italian brands sell very well. Specialized is a really well selling brand here. Pinarello, Largo. There's lots and lots of bling bikes out there on the mountains. I mean, it's the same thing that you probably remember from Hong Kong and what you see in Korea and Thailand. The high-end market always goes pretty well in Asia.
Yeah.
And then the domestic brands, there isn't one yet that's really got a strong foothold. That's definitely going to be the Chinese Trek or Chinese Specialized. There's a whole bunch of them that over the years have sort of come and gone with a big hoo-ha and lots of money and great-looking bikes at incredibly cheap prices, and then they disappear after a couple of years. So, I mean, it's still, at the moment, as a hobby, it's still for the well-off, and the well-off clients still want to ride the top of the range, Pinarello or Specialized. So that's where the market's at.
And do you see the uptake of cycling as a leisure activity continuing to grow beyond just the upper classes, or it's still a wealthy sport at the moment?
I've seen since this COVID situation, more and more people out in the streets just riding to work. and avoiding the subway and being in congested spaces with others. And I mean, in general, Chinese people are pretty health conscious when they've got the time to focus on it. And a lot of my wife's friends are not hardcore cyclists, but they still like to go out and exercise on a bike. And they're starting to become interested in buying, nice bikes to ride to work on and ride to a coffee or just ride for fun on the weekends. So it's starting to develop into more mainstream sport, but still has a long, long way to go.
Yeah, I have to say that's been one of the best things about lockdown I've seen here, and I've mentioned it on previous pods, just the increased numbers, couples in their 60s out riding together. It is brilliant to see. It's actually International World Bike Day today, so well timed that we have this conversation. Wow. But there are, to your point, saying that you've seen more people cycling to work in Beijing. That blows my mind, because who was it that sung the song "A Billion Bikes in Beijing"? Do you know that one?
Yes, I forgot the name of the artist.
Because I've never seen so many bikes in one city. It's quite amazing. It really is part of the DNA within the city, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The side walks when you were here were really overflowing with rental bikes, the share bikes. Those have now come under control a little bit, and there are less and less of them around, but there's still a lot of bikes in the city.
Yeah, and people get around quite frequently. It's quite hairy in some parts in the inner city, but the outside was absolutely stunning. I remember your wife telling me that again, up until the late 90s, she used to cycle across from one end of Beijing to the other in a very short amount of time. I couldn't imagine doing that now. It'd take you quite a while to get across the urban sprawl. So what's the plan? Obviously, we got the adventure bike coming out. When will that be ready for purchase and inquiries? Are you taking inquiries now?
Yes, we have information up on our website with some images, some preview images of bike and the specs. So we'll soon be taking pre-orders. We expect it to be ready within 3 to 4 months. With the COVID-19, things are still a little bit slow on the manufacturing side, but it'll be done by the end of the season. Also designing a couple of new paint schemes for our existing bikes, and you'll see a lot more events on our bikes and information coming out about the stories behind the bikes and the technology and info on the factory and so on. Because the next couple of months we have lots of time to plow into developing the bike side of the business. So it's sort of a blessing in disguise that the trips are on hold for a little while. Gives us time to get all the bike stuff out.
To focus, yeah. And that'll be, let us know when all that's published as well, because I know there's some fascinating stories around just how high quality the factory is and some of the other work they do as a factory as well. So that'll be interesting to hear. Normally I'd sort of ask you a few travel related questions, but China's so vast, it's hard to say. I think you said the Himalayas is your favorite place within China to go ride, and you recommend that. Are there any parts of China that are on your to-do list that you haven't managed to go out and discover yet, and you think that there may be opportunity for tours in the future?
Yeah, Gansu province is the next one on my list.
Okay.
I think it's probably one of the last provinces to be asphalted over.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of gravel riding there, and I'm looking forward to doing a bit of bikepacking around there and exploring those roads and the culture there. So that's on my radar for later in the year.
Yeah, cool. And again, given how vast China is, I mean, you mentioned culture there. It's so different from province to province and city to city. It's kind of hard to sort of paint it in one brush. But for people that might be listening that are thinking, wow, this sounds like there's some amazing things on offer there, but are a little bit intimidated or unsure about riding in China and going to China, what can you say to reassure them in terms of sort of safety and food and amenities and stuff like that?
Well, these days, first of all, China's very accessible. So you can, fly into a major center like Chengdu or Shanghai or Beijing, and you can get onto a fast train, and within 5 or 6 hours you can be out in the middle of nowhere. And nowadays, out in the middle of nowhere, there's also lots of nice hotels that are springing up. So there's great places to stay, great things to see, and there's a burgeoning new kind of tourist industry that's coming up, which makes it relatively easy to travel. I mean, it's a bit difficult if you don't have Chinese language skills, but people out there are super friendly, and with a translation app, you'll get by, and you'll definitely have an adventure, and it's very safe. I mean, I think you'd have no problem, like I said, just jumping on a fast train, going out to some of these beautiful locations and mapping out some stuff on Ride with GPS or Strava and doing a few days riding. People will be friendly, hospitable, and they'll definitely help you out if you get into any difficulties.
Yeah, definitely. And as someone that's been there a few times, and obviously I cycle with yourself there, I'd echo those sentiments. I think that a lot of my preconceptions around China before I actually went there and spent time there and traveled there were so far removed from what it's really like on the ground, how friendly the people are, how accessible things are. People want to help. It's a beautiful place with so much diversity on offer. And I know that Serk is all about frontier cycling, but just generally, I think it's a fascinating place to go and see.
Absolutely, and of course, if you want a guide, we're always available to help. If you're interested, you can come along on one of our trips, or if you're just thinking of doing something yourself, just send us an email. We're happy to point you in the right direction, and give you some suggestions on where might be good or who else, which other operators or hostels or whatever to hook up with. We're happy to help out.
Superb. Shannon, look, I've already taken up loads of your time. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure as we've heard, you're super busy with the bike brand. Have I missed anything? Is there anything else you'd like to add or tell people, or have we've covered quite a lot, I think?
Yeah, I think we got it all. It's been great to catch up with you, Jules.
And you, mate.
Great to see that Unfound is going along well, and it's always good to talk with you and share some ideas and stories. So hopefully we can continue doing that into the future.
Good stuff. We'd love to have you back on, and please do share all the links you can with regards to the trips that you're doing, your bike as well, the frame, how people can size themselves up and shipping and all those bits and pieces. And if anyone's interested, Shannon honestly is one of the most friendly, most helpful people you'll ever meet. So he'll gladly respond to any queries you have with regard to the bike frames or any trips or travel plans to China. And if you're feeling really brave, get yourself signed up. Do we have a name yet for your ultra endurance Himalayan adventure or race?
The Himalaya something race. We're still unsure on the middle words.
Still work in progress. The only thing I actually forgot to mention you when you talked us through that is that it sounded absolutely spectacular and going through some really interesting parts of China, but it also sounded like it was 1,800 kilometers uphill. Predominantly.
Yes. Yeah, there's a fair bit of uphill. Unfortunately, the Ride with GPS overestimates the elevation, because when we checked it out recently, it was something like 40,000 meters of climbing, but I think that's overestimated it by a long way. So still working on that final number.
Still sounds brutal. And there's one more thing that I wanted to just quickly ask you before you sign off. I know that you mentioned obviously riding up in the Himalayas is absolutely spectacular, and when you see Everest, and one of the things that I remember from the video you did the first time around with cycling tips is that descent. Isn't there like a 48 kilometer descent with no cars on and brand new roads? Have I got that right?
Yeah, it's about 40 kilometers, and it's just as you go into Everest Base Camp Park. So you go from 5,100 meters down this epic switchback road to around about 4,000 something meters. So it's a long, gorgeous descent.
Amazing.
And the whole way, every time you come around every second bend, you see Everest there right in front of you. So it's pretty amazing descent.
Yeah, absolutely outstanding. And I was going to ask you, what's your favorite descent in the world? It's got to be that one, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That one is the best. There's also another one that's now closed, but we did it in the early days when we went from Tibet into Nepal. That's a 70k descent from 5,000 meters all the way down to like 1,700 meters. Wow. And you're changing landscapes. In that descent, you change country, you change climate, you change language, you change smell. It's just phenomenal 70Ks on the bike. But in the earthquake in that region, the road was totally destroyed. So unfortunately, they're not planning on rebuilding it.
Oh, what a shame. Wow, that sounds incredible. Excellent. Look, I'll leave you to it. Really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much. Let's get you back on once we got some more details on the event itself. But thank you, and we'll catch up soon, my friend.
Okay, thanks, Jules. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast. And more importantly, don't forget to download the Unfound app and join cyclists from around the world on the hub. We'll see you on there.